The police officer slammed the black veteran face first onto the pavement, right in front of the Memorial Day crowd. Then he shouted the words everyone nearby would remember. "Stop resisting." The problem? The veteran wasn't resisting. Not even a little. Interesting. Very interesting. Because hundreds of people were standing close enough to see exactly what happened, and many of them immediately reached for their phones. The Memorial Day ceremony had started as a peaceful morning. Flags lined the streets. Families gathered near the town square. Veterans wore old service caps. Children carried miniature American flags. A brass band played softly in the distance. For most people, it was a day of remembrance. For Elijah Carter, it was something even more personal. It was a day to remember names. Names most people had forgotten. Friends, teammates, brothers, men who never came home. Elijah stood quietly near a memorial wall shortly before noon. 42 years old. Tall, athletic, calm. The years had added gray to his beard, but hadn't changed the way he carried himself. His posture still looked military. His eyes still scanned every environment automatically. 18 years as a Navy SEAL leaves marks that never disappear. Interesting. Very interesting. Most people looking at Elijah that morning saw an ordinary black man wearing a navy polo shirt and jeans. They didn't see the deployments. They didn't see the medals. They didn't see the missions. And Elijah preferred it that way. He wasn't there to be recognized. He was there to remember. A small black bracelet rested around his wrist. 3 names were engraved into the metal. 3 teammates. 3 friends. 3 men buried under white headstones. Elijah touched the bracelet briefly, then lowered his hand. The ceremony was about to begin. A young boy nearby noticed the bracelet. "Are those your friends?" Elijah smiled. A real smile. The kind that appeared rarely. "Yeah." The boy looked up. "Were they soldiers?" Elijah nodded. The child thought for a moment, then quietly said, "I'm sorry." Interesting. Very interesting. Because sometimes children understand respect better than adults. Elijah thanked him. The boy ran back toward his family. And for a moment, everything felt peaceful. Normal. Then the shouting started. At first it came from somewhere near the food vendors. A commotion. Nothing major. People turned their heads briefly, then looked away. But a few minutes later, another voice echoed across the area. Louder this time. More aggressive. Elijah noticed several people stepping backward, creating space. Instinct immediately kicked in. Military instincts. The kind that notice tension before most people recognize it. He glanced toward the disturbance. A police officer was arguing with an elderly man. The old man looked confused. Not threatening, just confused. A volunteer tried explaining something. The officer wasn't listening. Interesting. Very interesting. Elijah hesitated, then walked closer. Not because he wanted trouble, because he wanted to understand what was happening. The officer's name tag read, Ryan Keller. Mid-30s. Broad shoulders. Rigid posture. The kind of man who seemed permanently angry. The elderly man appeared to be standing in a restricted section by mistake. Nothing more. At least from what Elijah could see. The volunteer repeated the explanation. Ryan ignored it. The old man looked embarrassed. The crowd looked uncomfortable. Elijah stepped forward. Carefully. Respectfully. "Officer." Ryan turned. "What?" The response immediately caught Elijah's attention. Interesting. Very interesting. Because most professionals don't answer simple questions like that. Elijah kept his tone calm. "I think there may be a misunderstanding." Ryan stared at him. Several seconds passed. Long enough to become awkward. "What did you say?" The atmosphere shifted. Just slightly. But everyone felt it. Elijah remained composed. "I said I think there may be a misunderstanding." Ryan took a step closer. Now the officer wasn't focused on the elderly man anymore. Now he was focused entirely on Elijah. Interesting. Very interesting. The volunteer attempted to intervene. "Officer, he's just trying to help." Nobody asked him. The volunteer immediately fell silent. The crowd grew quieter. Elijah noticed phones appearing. One, then another, then several more. Ryan looked him up and down, judging him, measuring him, making assumptions. "What business is this of yours?" Elijah answered honestly. "None." The response seemed to surprise Ryan. "I'm just trying to keep things calm." For a brief moment, Elijah thought the situation might end there. He was wrong. Very wrong. Ryan stepped even closer. Close enough that several spectators exchanged nervous looks. "You giving me instructions now?" "No." "You telling me how to do my job?" "No." "Interesting. Very interesting. Because Elijah wasn't raising his voice, wasn't arguing, wasn't threatening. Yet Ryan appeared increasingly angry. The officer pointed toward the crowd. Move along. Elijah nodded. Okay. And then he turned to leave. That should have been the end. It wasn't. Behind him, Ryan suddenly grabbed his arm. Hard. The movement was so unexpected that the crowd gasped. Elijah immediately stopped. Years of training told him not to react. Not physically. Not emotionally. Not publicly. What are you doing? He asked calmly. Ryan's grip tightened. Stop resisting. The crowd looked confused. Because nobody saw resistance. Nobody. Interesting. Very interesting. Several phones were recording now. Elijah slowly raised both hands. A universal gesture. A peaceful gesture. A gesture designed to reduce tension. It had the opposite effect. Ryan suddenly shoved him. Hard. Elijah lost balance. The pavement rushed upward. The impact echoed across the square. Gasps erupted everywhere. A woman screamed. A child started crying. And before Elijah could even understand what had happened, a knee drove into his back. Handcuffs appeared. Cold steel. Metal clicking shut. The crowd erupted. People shouted. Some protested. Others demanded explanations. Ryan ignored all of them. Stop resisting. Again. The same words. The same accusation. The same lie. Interesting. Very interesting. Because Elijah still hadn't resisted. Not once. Not even after being thrown to the ground. The American flag above the memorial fluttered in the afternoon wind. Elijah looked toward it. For a moment, his eyes fixed on the red, white, and blue. Then on the names carved into the memorial wall beyond the crowd. Names of men who died serving the same country. Men who never got the chance to defend themselves. A strange sadness settled over him. Not anger. Sadness. Because after everything he had done for that flag, he was now lying in handcuffs beneath it. Ryan pulled him to his feet. The crowd continued shouting. The phones continued recording. And as Elijah was pushed toward the waiting patrol car, he had no idea that the videos being captured that day were about to change everything. The videos began spreading before Elijah even reached the police station. Interesting. Very interesting. Because news travels fast. Outrage travels faster. Especially when hundreds of people witness the same moment. And thousands more watch it online. The patrol car rolled through downtown traffic. Elijah sat quietly in the back seat. Handcuffed. Silent. Looking through reinforced glass. The city moved normally outside. People crossed streets. Restaurants served lunch. Children played in parks. Nobody knew where he was. Nobody knew what had happened. At least not yet. Officer Ryan Keller sat in the front seat. Confident. Relaxed. Almost cheerful. That caught Elijah's attention. Interesting. Very interesting. Because most officers involved in a public arrest spend time reviewing events afterward. Ryan looked like a man who had already decided how the story would end. The radio crackled. Dispatch traffic. Routine updates. Nothing unusual. Then another officer's voice appeared. You're already all over social media. Ryan smiled. Actually smiled. What are they saying? Depends which video they're watching. The smile faded slightly. Only slightly. Interesting. Very interesting. Because for the first time all afternoon, uncertainty entered the conversation. The police station sat only 15 minutes away. Yet somehow the drive felt longer. Inside, procedures began immediately. Photographs. Paperwork. Questions. Processing. The same routine repeated thousands of times every year. Except Elijah wasn't most people. And this wasn't a normal arrest. A young desk officer looked at the paperwork. Then looked at Elijah. Then looked again. Confused. Resisting arrest? Ryan nodded. That's right. The officer glanced at Elijah. The veteran stood quietly. Hands folded. Calm. No anger. No attitude. No aggression. Interesting. Very interesting. Because he didn't look like someone who had fought police officers. He looked like someone waiting for a delayed flight. The desk officer wisely said nothing. Ryan completed his report. Quickly. Confidently. The words flowed easily. Too easily. According to the report, Elijah had become confrontational. Elijah had refused instructions. Elijah had resisted physical control. Elijah had created a public disturbance. Interesting. Very interesting. Because almost none of it resembled what actually happened. But paperwork has power, especially when completed by someone wearing a badge. Hours later, Elijah finally sat alone inside a holding room. The walls were gray. The lighting harsh. The silence heavy. Yet strangely, he wasn't angry. Not yet. Mostly he felt disappointed. Deeply disappointed. Because Memorial Day wasn't supposed to end like this. His eyes drifted toward the black bracelet still around his wrist. The names remained there. Jackson. Reed. Morales. 3 teammates. 3 brothers. 3 funerals. Interesting. Very interesting. Because Elijah had survived things most people could never imagine. Combat deployments. Night operations. Hostile territory. Loss. Real loss. And yet somehow being handcuffed at a Memorial Day ceremony hurt in a different way. Not physically. Personally. A memory surfaced. Years earlier. Afghanistan. A small patrol base. A young teammate asking a question. What do you miss most about home? Elijah remembered laughing. Then answering. Freedom. The irony almost made him smile now. Almost. The door opened. An attorney entered. Middle-aged. Sharp suit. Alert eyes. Her name was Denise Harper. A civil rights attorney who occasionally worked with veterans organizations. Mr. Carter? Elijah nodded. She sat across from him. I've been trying to reach you for 3 hours. Sorry. Not your fault. Interesting. Very interesting. Because Denise looked less concerned about the arrest than she did about something else. Something larger. She placed a tablet on the table, then rotated it toward him. What am I looking at? Your afternoon. The screen displayed a social media page. Then another. Then another. Thousands of comments. Millions of views. Videos. News clips. Reaction channels. Everything. Everywhere. The footage had exploded. Elijah stared. A woman had recorded the arrest from 10 feet away. A teenager captured another angle. A local reporter posted additional footage. The clips were spreading across every major platform. Interesting. Very interesting. Because suddenly the story wasn't local anymore. It belonged to the internet. And the internet had opinions. Lots of opinions. Some defended Ryan. Others condemned him. Arguments filled every comment section. Questions multiplied by the hour. What really happened? Why was the veteran arrested? Was force necessary? Was he resisting? Nobody agreed. Except on one thing. People wanted answers. Denise swiped to another screen. Television coverage. The headline appeared. Memorial Day arrest of black veteran sparks questions, then another. And another. The story was growing. Fast. Very fast. Elijah leaned back. I didn't ask for any of this. I know. And I don't want attention. I know. Interesting. Very interesting. Because the people who deserve attention often avoid it. The people chasing attention usually don't. Denise folded her hands. There's another problem. Elijah immediately noticed her tone. What problem? She hesitated. Only briefly. Then handed him several pages. Official charging documents. Elijah read silently. The first charge didn't surprise him. Resisting arrest. The second did. Disorderly conduct. The third made him stop completely. Obstruction of a law enforcement officer. Interesting. Very interesting. Because now this wasn't just embarrassment. It was a criminal case. A real one. With real consequences. Elijah slowly lowered the papers. He actually filed this. Denise nodded. This morning. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Elijah laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because disbelief sometimes sounds like laughter. He knows there are videos. Apparently. He knows people saw everything. Apparently. Interesting. Very interesting. Because confidence becomes dangerous when it ignores reality. And Ryan Keller still seemed very confident. Too confident. Denise stood. There's something else. What? She hesitated again. Longer this time. Then opened another video. Different angle. Different location. Different camera. Not yet public. Not yet released. Not yet analyzed. The footage came from farther away. Near the memorial wall. The image quality wasn't perfect. But it captured more of the encounter than other clips. Much more. Elijah leaned forward. Interesting. Very interesting. Because for the first time all day, hope entered the room. Small hope. Fragile hope. But hope nonetheless. Denise paused the video before playing it. I haven't reviewed the entire thing yet. Elijah looked at the screen. Then at her. What does it show? The attorney met his gaze. And the answer immediately changed everything. I don't know. She paused. But if what I think is on this video. Another pause. Officer Keller may have a very serious problem. Officer Keller may have a very serious problem. The words lingered in the room long after Denise stopped speaking. Interesting. Very interesting. Because hope is a dangerous thing. especially when you've spent an entire day watching people believe a lie. Elijah looked at the paused video. The image was grainy, distant, imperfect, yet somehow it felt more important than anything he had seen so far. Denise pressed play. The footage began moving. The camera angle came from near the memorial wall, apparently recorded by a retired veteran documenting the ceremony before everything went wrong. No dramatic soundtrack, no narration, just reality. The crowd, the flags, the ceremony, then Ryan Keller, then Elijah. The room became silent, completely silent. Both watched carefully. Every movement, every gesture, every second. Interesting, very interesting, because truth often hides inside details, and details don't care about opinions. The video showed Elijah approaching calmly, exactly as he remembered. No aggressive body language, no threatening posture, no raised voice, nothing. The volunteer speaking, the elderly man looking confused, the officer growing irritated. Then came the critical moment. Ryan ordered Elijah to move along. Elijah nodded. Immediately, without argument, without hesitation, without resistance. The footage clearly showed him turning away, actually leaving, exactly as instructed. Denise paused the video. Neither spoke, neither needed to, because one thing had become obvious. The official report wasn't merely inaccurate. It was collapsing. Interesting, very interesting. Denise replayed the sequence. Again, then slower. Every viewing produced the same result. Elijah complied. Ryan escalated. The facts weren't complicated. The footage continued. The grab, the shove, the takedown, the handcuffs, everything. For the first time since Memorial Day, Elijah saw the entire incident from outside himself. And somehow it looked even worse than he remembered. The attorney closed the tablet. Slowly, carefully, then looked directly at him. This changes everything. Elijah nodded. Will it? Denise smiled slightly. A tired smile. A lawyer's smile. The video helps. A pause. A lot. Interesting. Very interesting. Because good attorneys learn never to promise outcomes. Only possibilities. Still, possibilities were better than where Elijah had been yesterday. The following morning, Denise filed motions demanding the release of all available footage. Body cameras, security cameras, witness recordings, everything. At the same time, local news stations obtained copies of the memorial video. Then national outlets did the same. Then social media exploded. Again, only this time the conversation sounded different. Very different. Questions became criticism. Criticism became scrutiny. Scrutiny became pressure. And pressure began moving toward Officer Ryan Keller. Interesting. Very interesting. Because public opinion isn't a courtroom, but it can change what people choose to examine. 3 days later, Elijah was sitting quietly in his living room when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, he answered. Hello. Several seconds passed. Then a voice responded. A familiar voice. A voice he hadn't heard in years. Elijah. His eyes widened immediately. Mike. Former Chief Petty Officer Mike Donovan laughed. You still sound ugly. Elijah smiled despite himself. The first genuine smile since the arrest. Interesting. Very interesting. Because some friendships survive distance. Some survive time. And some survive war. Mike Donovan had served with Elijah for nearly a decade. They had deployed together, trained together, nearly died together. The call lasted over an hour. They discussed the news, the videos, the charges, the absurdity of everything. Before hanging up, Mike said something unexpected. I'm coming. Elijah frowned. What? I'm coming to court. You don't need to do that. Yeah. Mike paused. I do. The call ended. Elijah stared at the phone. Then another call arrived. Then another. And another. Interesting. Very interesting. Because the internet had done something nobody expected. It had found his old team. Former teammates recognized him instantly. Not because of the arrest. Because of the bracelet. The posture. The face. The way he remained calm on the pavement. Only SEALs understood certain things. And they knew exactly who they were looking at. By the end of the week, Elijah had spoken with men from 4 different states. Then 6. Then 8. Some he hadn't seen in over a decade. One was now a firefighter. Another owned a construction company. One taught high school history. Another worked in emergency medicine. Different lives. Different paths. Same bond. Interesting. Very interesting. Because military service eventually ends. Brotherhood doesn't. The calls shared one common theme. Nobody believed the report. Nobody believed Elijah had resisted. And nobody intended to stay silent. The media noticed. Naturally, reporters began contacting former teammates. Interview requests followed. Most declined. They weren't interested in publicity, but many agreed to answer one question. What kind of man is Elijah Carter? The answers sounded remarkably similar. Disciplined, honorable, reliable, calm under pressure, a leader, a teammate, a man trusted with lives. Again, and again, and again. Interesting. Very interesting. Because character takes years to build, yet sometimes only a few witnesses to reveal. Meanwhile, Officer Keller's situation continued. Deteriorating. Internal Affairs opened a preliminary review. The department issued careful statements. Very careful statements. The kind organizations release when they are worried. Ryan publicly maintained his version of events. Privately, rumors suggested something else. His confidence appeared shaken. Noticeably shaken. The videos kept spreading. The questions kept growing. The pressure kept increasing. And court was approaching. Fast. Very fast. 1 week before the hearing, Denise visited Elijah again. This time carrying a folder. A thick folder. She placed it on the table. What is that? The attorney smiled. A surprise. Interesting. Very interesting. Because lawyers rarely smile while carrying paperwork. Elijah opened the folder. Inside were letters. Dozens of letters. Statements. Affidavits. Character references. Military records. Testimonials. Page after page. People willing to stand beside him. People willing to speak for him. People willing to tell the truth. Then Elijah noticed something else. A list. Names. Many names. Former teammates. Former operators. Former Navy SEALs. His eyes moved down the page. Then stopped. Then continued. Then stopped again. There were more names than he expected. Far more. He looked up. Confused. What's this? Denise folded her arms. The smile returned. This time larger. Those are the men who confirmed attendance. Attendance where? The attorney's answer arrived quietly. Yet somehow it felt enormous. Court. Elijah stared at her. She nodded. Every one of them. Interesting. Very interesting. Because suddenly this wasn't only a legal case anymore. It had become something else. Something deeper. Something stronger. Brotherhood. And for the first time since Ryan Keller forced him onto the pavement, Elijah realized he wasn't standing alone. Not even close. Elijah realized he wasn't standing alone. Not even close. But nothing prepared him for what happened on the morning of the hearing. Interesting. Very interesting. Because support sounds powerful in theory. Seeing it with your own eyes is something else entirely. The courthouse stood 3 blocks from the town square where everything had begun. The same city. The same community. The same people who had watched the videos. Now they wanted answers. News vans lined the street before sunrise. Reporters gathered near the entrance. Camera crews adjusted equipment. Microphones waited. The case had become bigger than anyone expected. Much bigger. Inside, Denise reviewed documents one final time. Evidence summaries. Witness statements. Video transcripts. Everything organized. Everything ready. Elijah sat quietly beside her. Calm. Focused. The same way he had approached missions years earlier. Interesting. Very interesting. Because experience teaches some people how to remain steady when pressure arrives. And pressure had definitely arrived. A court officer opened the door. Mr. Carter? Elijah stood. The hearing was about to begin. As he stepped into the hallway, he noticed people looking at him. Some nodded respectfully. Others simply watched. Word had spread. Most knew exactly who he was. The black veteran from Memorial Day. The man from the videos. The man accused of resisting arrest. The man who never appeared to resist. Then Elijah turned a corner. And stopped. Completely stopped. Interesting. Very interesting. Because suddenly the hallway didn't look like a courthouse anymore. It looked like a reunion. Men stood quietly along the wall. Some wore dark suits. Some wore military dress uniforms. Some carried service pins. Others displayed ribbons earned decades earlier. Every one of them stood straight. Every one of them looked toward Elijah. Mike Donovan stood nearest the front. The former SEAL smiled. You look old. A laugh rippled through the group. A small laugh. A familiar laugh. The kind shared between people who had survived difficult things together. Elijah looked around. One face. Then another. Then another. Men from different deployments. Different years. Different chapters of his life. Some he hadn't seen in 15 years. Some even longer. Yet every one of them had come. Interesting. Very interesting. Because distance weakens many relationships. Brotherhood isn't one of them. Mike stepped forward. You didn't think we'd let you walk in there alone, did you? Elijah opened his mouth, then closed it again. For perhaps the first time since the arrest, he couldn't find words. The group didn't come for publicity. They didn't come to intimidate anyone. They came because one of their own needed them. Simple as that. Inside the courtroom, reporters immediately noticed. So did everyone else. Whispers spread through the gallery. Fast. Very fast. Because row after row began filling with former military personnel, former Navy SEALs, special operations veterans, men whose records spoke for themselves. Interesting. Very interesting. Nobody caused a disturbance. Nobody demanded attention. Nobody made speeches. They simply sat down. Together. Quietly. The discipline alone changed the atmosphere. Then Officer Ryan Keller entered. And everything changed. The officer's confidence disappeared so quickly it was almost visible. He looked toward the gallery. Then looked again. His eyes moved across the rows. 1 veteran. 2 veterans. 10 veterans. 20. More. Far more. The color drained from his face. Interesting. Very interesting. Because for the first time since Memorial Day, Ryan realized this wasn't just another report. This wasn't just paperwork. Real people were here. People willing to testify. People willing to speak. People willing to challenge his version of events. The hearing began. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then sat. Silence followed. The prosecutor presented the official charges. The defense responded. Procedures moved forward. Everything appeared normal. At least initially. Then Denise stood and requested permission to present video evidence. The room became still. Very still. Because everyone knew why they were there. The videos. The truth. The question that had divided an entire city. What actually happened on Memorial Day? Interesting. Very interesting. The first recording appeared on a large screen. One angle. Then another. Then another. The footage played. The crowd watched. The reporters watched. The judge watched. Ryan watched. Most importantly, the videos watched Ryan. Every second. Every movement. Every decision. The room saw Elijah approaching calmly. The room saw him speaking respectfully. The room saw him complying. Immediately. Without hesitation. Without resistance. Then came the critical moment. Ryan ordered him to leave. Elijah turned away. Exactly as instructed. The footage paused. The judge leaned forward. Several jurors exchanged glances. Interesting. Very interesting. Because one fact had become impossible to ignore. If Elijah was already leaving, why did the confrontation continue? Denise resumed the video. The answer appeared seconds later. Ryan grabbed him. Not the other way around. Ryan escalated. Not Elijah. Ryan shoved. Not Elijah. The room watched in silence. Complete silence. The kind that only appears when reality becomes undeniable. One reporter slowly lowered her pen. Another stopped typing altogether. A third simply stared. Because the footage wasn't complicated. It didn't require interpretation. It showed exactly what happened. Then Denise presented Ryan's written report. Line by line. Statement by statement. Each claim compared against the video. Interesting. Very interesting. The differences weren't small. They were enormous. The report claimed resistance. The video showed compliance. The report described aggression. The video showed calmness. The report suggested danger. The video suggested none. With every comparison, Ryan appeared smaller. Not physically. Emotionally. His confidence evaporated. His certainty disappeared. The judge remained expressionless. But everyone in the room could feel the shift. The case was turning. Fast. Very fast. Then internal affairs representatives were called. Questions followed. Difficult questions. Uncomfortable questions. Questions Ryan clearly hadn't expected. His answers grew shorter. Less confident. More defensive. Interesting. Very interesting. Because lies often become harder to maintain when evidence keeps speaking. By late afternoon, the atmosphere had completely changed. The focus was no longer Elijah Carter. It was Ryan Keller. The officer who made the arrest. The officer who wrote the report. The officer whose actions now sat under a microscope. The judge reviewed several documents. Then looked directly toward the internal affairs investigators. The room became silent once more. Everyone sensed something important. Something significant. The judge spoke calmly. Measured. deliberate. Based on the evidence presented today. A pause. Long enough. This court recommends a formal investigation into Officer Ryan Keller's conduct. Silence. Then shock. Visible shock. Especially on Ryan's face. Interesting. Very interesting. Because until that moment, he had expected Elijah to be defending himself. Instead, he had become the one being investigated. And for the first time since Memorial Day, Officer Ryan Keller looked afraid. For the first time since Memorial Day, Officer Ryan Keller looked afraid. And over the next few weeks, he had every reason to be. Interesting. Very interesting. Because truth moves slowly. Until it doesn't. The formal investigation began almost immediately. Internal Affairs reviewed every report, every statement, every video, every second of body camera footage. What started as a complaint quickly became something much larger. The evidence told a story. A very different story. Not the one Ryan had written. Not the one he had submitted. Not the one he expected people to believe. The charges against Elijah Carter were dismissed first. Quietly. Efficiently. Without resistance. The prosecution reviewed the evidence. Then reviewed it again. The conclusion was unavoidable. There was no legitimate basis for the accusations. No resistance. No obstruction. No disorderly conduct. Nothing. Interesting. Very interesting. Because a lie can travel very far. But eventually, it reaches the truth. And the truth doesn't move. One afternoon, Denise arrived at Elijah's house carrying a familiar folder. This time she looked relaxed. For the first time in weeks. It's over. Elijah looked up. What is the case? A small smile appeared. Then another. The veteran leaned back in his chair. Silent. For several seconds. Not because he was surprised. Because he was relieved. Deeply relieved. The weight he had carried since Memorial Day finally began to lift. Interesting. Very interesting. Because freedom feels different after someone tries to take it away. The city issued an official statement shortly afterward. The mayor's office. The police department. Community leaders. All. Acknowledging that Elijah should never have been arrested. The apology made headlines. National headlines. Television interviews followed. Media requests multiplied. Everyone wanted to hear Elijah's side. Everyone wanted him angry. Everyone wanted outrage. Everyone wanted revenge. They didn't get it. Interesting. Very interesting. Because Elijah had spent most of his adult life learning discipline. And discipline rarely produces revenge. During one interview, a reporter asked the obvious question. Do you hate Officer Keller? The room became quiet. The reporter expected one answer. The audience expected another. Elijah gave neither. He thought for a moment, then spoke calmly. No. The reporter looked confused. No. Elijah shook his head. Hate takes too much energy. Silence followed. Then he added, I'd rather spend that energy honoring the people who aren't here anymore. The interview clip spread everywhere. Millions watched it. Many replayed it. Because in a world obsessed with conflict, grace felt unusual. Very unusual. Meanwhile, Ryan Keller's career continued unraveling. The investigation concluded. Disciplinary findings followed. The details became public. Some were embarrassing. Others were worse. The officer who once seemed untouchable now looked very ordinary. Very vulnerable. Interesting. Very interesting. Because authority and character are not the same thing. One can be issued. The other must be earned. Summer passed. Then autumn. Then winter. The story slowly faded from headlines. Another story replaced it. Then another. The world moved on. As it always does. But Elijah never forgot Memorial Day. How could he? The handcuffs. The pavement. The humiliation. The flag. The names on the memorial wall. Those memories stayed with him. Yet something else stayed too. The phone calls. The letters. The courtroom. The men who showed up. The Brotherhood. That remained as well. 1 year later, Memorial Day returned. The town organized another ceremony. Larger than the previous one. Attendance reached record numbers. Veterans gathered. Families arrived early. Flags lined the streets once more. The same brass band played familiar songs. Interesting. Very interesting. Because life often gives us opportunities to revisit places where we were hurt. And sometimes, those places become places of healing. Elijah almost declined the invitation. Almost. Then Denise convinced him otherwise. You belong there. Maybe she was right. On a bright morning beneath a clear blue sky, Elijah stepped onto the ceremony platform. Hundreds of people filled the square. Some recognized him immediately. Others simply knew his story. Near the front row sat Mike Donovan. Beside him sat former teammates. Then more former teammates. Rows of them. Many wearing service pins. Several wearing dress uniforms. Every one of them sitting quietly, proudly, respectfully, exactly as they had done in court. Interesting. Very interesting. Because they didn't come to be seen. They came because one of their brothers was speaking. The ceremony proceeded. Names were read. Flags lowered. Moments of silence observed. Then Elijah approached the podium. The crowd became still. Very still. He looked across the audience. Then toward the memorial wall. The same wall where this story began. The same names. The same memories. For a moment, emotion caught in his throat. Then he spoke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just honestly. When I served. Silence. I learned many things. The crowd listened. I learned courage. A pause. I learned sacrifice. Another pause. And I learned something even more important. He looked toward his former teammates. Then toward the veterans seated nearby. Finally toward the crowd. Honor. Interesting. Very interesting. Because everyone in attendance understood that word differently. Yet everyone understood it. Elijah continued. The uniform taught us something. The breeze moved gently through the flags behind him. Honor isn't what people give you. Silence. It's what you keep when they try to take it away. The words settled across the square. Quietly. Powerfully. No applause followed immediately. Just reflection. Then one veteran stood. Slowly. Deliberately. A salute. Another veteran followed. Then another. Then another. Soon dozens of veterans stood together. Saluting. Not because of a headline. Not because of a lawsuit. Not because of publicity. Because they recognized honor when they saw it. Interesting. Very interesting. Elijah returned the salute. His eyes drifted toward the sky. Toward the flag. Toward the names engraved into stone. Jackson. Reed. Morales. 3 friends. 3 brothers. 3 men who never came home. A small smile appeared. Not sadness. Not anger. Peace. The kind of peace earned through hardship. The kind that remains after truth wins. Because Officer Keller took Elijah's freedom for one day. But he never took his honor. That had been earned long before the handcuffs. Long before the courthouse. Long before the cameras. And long after the headlines disappeared, it remained.